But we do have some historical parallels. You may think being accused of witchcraft isn't quite the same as being locked up because you're mad, but it seems here with plenty of room for misdiagnosis. Here's an example nearer our time, which is specifically about being locked up because you're mad. It does seem that sometimes the wrong kind of behaviour can condemn you to an institution. Here's another way of looking at madness. It's a way of coping with impossible situations. This was the interpretation of the anti-psychiatry movement of the 60s. R.D. Laing was an important thinker in this area. And in the next couple of slides, you'll see what he gives as the conditions for being ontologically secure. Sure of yourself, sure of your place in the world, not having a problem with your existence. Okay, you might not think having those perceptions as being much of a problem, but Laing points out that for some people this is a problem. And in fact, nowadays we have a whole genre of literature, misery memoirs, or as Waterstones puts it, difficult lives. People who've been brought up in ways which do throw doubts on their essential existence, their value, their wholeness. Laing and Esterson's book Sanity, Madness and the Family gives a number of case histories which support this idea quite well. One example they give of how what seem to be psychotic symptoms can be explained as a way of describing dealing with mad situations is of a teenager who felt that her parents could read her thoughts. Not a normal thing to say. On the other hand, her parents, in a separate interview, would say things like, "You know, we always felt we knew what she was thinking, and sometimes we'd make bets with each other about what she was going to say next, and we were very often right." Laing's ideas as anti-psychiatry, of course, weren't popular with the psychiatric movement, although they became very popular and modish elsewhere. And they also had the problem of suggesting that perhaps schizophrenia in particular was something that your parents did to you, which obviously doesn't go down well with parents of schizophrenic children. A more general idea is, though, that power and politics, lies and deception are tied up in diagnoses of madness, just as they're tied up in many other social interactions. Okay, this is getting to the end of the lecture, so where have we got to? I haven't talked about biological models of madness, and you know there are various of those, and there is evidence for and against them. But even if you accept that the source of the problem is biological, as psychologists, I think we need to account for the form in which the symptoms come out and the social structure and the social consequences within which madness is perceived and dealt with. Here's a review of what I've been talking about, put out in a timeline. I'm not sure there's really a progression here, but different things did happen at different times. At the end of the 19th century, as we've discussed in other lectures, the idea of mental illness and the possibility of therapy took hold. The work of people like Kraepelin and Freud were important there. And then through the first half of the 20th century, you get the development of a profession of psychiatry, systems for categorizing illness, and the idea that institutions for the mentally ill could be therapeutic rather than just containing and controlling. Alongside that, there was a conflict, a controversy about whether these issues were really psychological or biological. Do you deal with talking cures, helping people make sense of things, or do you find effective drugs or maybe even neurosurgery to solve their problems? As you go into the second half of the 20th century, there's increasing systematization with the development of things like the DSM, um, and there becomes a dominance of the medical model. Mental illness, especially things like depression, of course, are to do with things your doctor can help you with, maybe more than your therapist. But alongside that, there were approaches questioning the value of institutionalization and even condemning some institutions. And so that's Goffman, Rosenhan. Lang questioned the basis of psychiatry, at least as applied to major psychoses. Towards the end of the 20th century, we have people questioning the kinds of categorization, the way the DSM splits things up into maybe oversimplistic categories. But of course, although I've not talked about it here, you will have come across in other parts of the course, we've got increasingly sophisticated biological methods, so we can look at brain chemistry, brain structure, brain function in ways which were impossible even 20 years ago. And so the biomedical model, the brain malfunction model of mental illness has had a lot of support from that kind of research. So what have we got overall? Well, I think there are stories of institutionalization and misdiagnosis which are a dreadful warning to what we might do now, and it's nice to think of these in the bad old days, but there may be similar problems with what's going on now. Sats points out that problems with living can be diagnosed or seen as being to do with mental illness, and at the moment we have an issue of the inconvenient behaviour of disruptive children being diagnosed as ADHD, and children being medicated as a way of treating that mental problem. It's perhaps a worrying comparison. Lang's stories of crazy families and existential crises might seem a bit far-fetched. I have known some pretty crazy families, but as a way of accounting for distress and disturbance, yeah, that seems fine. Whether you can put the whole of schizophrenia down to that is more doubtful. So one message from the lecture is that madness is pretty complicated, and there are different ways of thinking about it and talking about it. Another one, in terms of the emphasis of this module on the social implications of psychology, is that there are potentially problems in medicalising unhappiness, and we have to be aware that madness is an industry, and there is a very big and profitable industry, the pharmaceutical industry, concerned with maybe helping, but if you're going to be cynical, maybe supporting and promoting ideas of madness and ideas which are things which can be treated by a profitable medication. Okay, that's it. Pretty compressed compared with the original lecture, but you can get much more detail and depth by looking at the handout and the readings in particular. I hope that's a useful reminder or a useful explainer if you didn't go to the lecture. Any comments you've got on this, any feedback would be very welcome. I hope your exams go well.